Hello and welcome back to the Soapbox YouTube channel. This is video number 2 in the Logic for Beginners series. Today I'll be looking at the library, the inspector window, and the arrangement window. So, first things first, what you'll most likely have to do is create a channel. So how do you create one of those channels? So we see this large X just here, which says new tracks. If you can't seem to find it, if you head over to track, new tracks, you will then have the same pop-up. Either way gets you to the same thing. It's just to slightly click away by pressing the plus button on your arrangement window. Once you've selected this plus channel to create a new channel or to create a new track, you're going to head over to software instrument. It will have one of two options. In the details in the drop down, you'll be able to select the instrument off the rip the moment you've attempted to create the channel. Logic will always create a default patch if you do not have these details open and set to something custom. So with a default patch selected as the instrument, please do not attempt to change anything out here in the output, as you may severely damage your project and you'll have to start from the beginning. So we're going to select the number of tracks. We just want one today. Gonna make sure that one's in the box here next to the number of tracks and click create. Once that's been created, you'll then see a track appear. The track by default, or the default patch, is an electric piano that we can see has loaded up just here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly pop up an on-screen keyboard so I can use my keys on my computer to play the piano quickly. Piano works perfectly fine. No issues there. Awesome. So you can change this patch via using this library window here on our left. So as you can see, the vintage electric piano is selected, and as we can see, another slightly gray box here appear. We're on the classic electric piano preset or patch. Is one of two ways of calling it. What if you don't want a vintage electric piano? That's perfectly fine. You can change it. If you head over again in the library, and we're looking at the first section on the furthest on the left, you should be able to locate all of these kind of lovely options. You have legacy, cinematic, arpeggio, synthesizers, studio horns, pianos, percussions, orchestrals, guitars. The list is huge. And the great thing is, all of these sounds are included completely for free with Logic. All you have to do is make sure you have sufficient space for them on your machine, and you can install all of them. As you can see, I don't quite have all of them installed, as you can see by this little downwards facing arrow, which basically means download. I don't have all of them installed. I've got like probably about 80% of them, and I'm still, 20% of the content is missing, and I still have a lot of sounds to pick from. But going back to what was mentioned earlier, let's say we don't want this vintage electric piano. Let's say we wanted a guitar. Great, let's head over to the guitar, click on guitar, and it will then show you all the possible presets or patches that you can use for guitars. Let's say we want a classic clean guitar. We'll just click on classic clean. It will then load up the sound, and you can see the little icon has changed to a guitar, and we are ready to go. That guitar is loaded and ready to be used. Let's just double check the sound, make sure it's still there. Not the best sound on the guitar, but definitely something that can be used within the project as a placement or as an idea generator, and have it there just to kind of know that you want a guitar within that spot. All these sounds are editable within the kind of samplers and the effects and everything that comes preloaded with the preset or patch. I will refer to them as presets for now because, well, in reality, that's what they are. They are preset sounds that are pre-made and predestined to achieve something. In this instance, it's a classic clean guitar. Again, we don't want that sound. That's cool. We can go back and change something else. We want a piano, and our classic piano would be a Yamaha Grand Piano. Click on Yamaha Grand Piano. It will then load in that preset, and we now have a piano. Boom, you have a piano. You're ready to use a piano for your beat, for your instrumental, for whatever you want to do. Again, this library is filled with tons and tons of sounds. So if you have an option or you have some time, mess around with it. Have a look at all these different options. You have a powered tube piano. I don't even know what this sounds like. beautiful luscious sound ready to go. Again, this is all included in your Logic download and install. Just please make sure you have the sufficient space for it. That was the library. Now we're going to head over to the inspector window, which is just here. I've just removed the library temporarily by clicking on it, just so we can focus on the inspector window here in the left. In the inspector window, we have tons of different things that we can look at. First things first, you have a region. It's a drop-down menu which allows you to adjust certain things within a region. A region would be a created clip or piece of block that you can interact with. How do you create one of those regions, you ask? If you're able to, what you want to do is you want to head over to your arrangement window, which is just here on the right. And within this larger out-facing box, you want to right-click within the timeline and click Create MIDI Region. It will create a green little box which can be adjusted to different lengths which you would prefer. Personally, I always prefer the length to be 4 bars, as that's the kind of default time that I tend to use. All of my tracks are written in parts of 4 bars or 8 bars, which is just double the length. When selected on the region, you'll see that you have power, tube, piano. These regions are controlled by different things across the board, both from what's within them and what's kind of placed in the inspector window. So going through the list for the region, we have mute, which will just disable that region. We then have loop, which means that it will extend that region to the end of your project. We then have a quantize feature, which basically means if anything was played in that region, you'll be able to make sure it's within time and maybe with like a specific groove in mind, which is predetermined by the system and different kind of musical ideas that have been done over time. We have a transpose, which just means that you can pitch the entire region up or down without having to interact with it. We then have velocity, which basically just like, I want it to be 26 ticks or 26 velocity ticks louder. This is something that we'll be looking at more in depth in another video. We then have a more drop down, which is just kind of like showing us the clip length so that it's adjustable, and then some more options that are a lot of the stuff here in the bottom, Q strength, Q velocity, and Q length and stuff like this, you won't actually see available to be used a lot of the times. It's one of the niche features within Logic that allows you to control a lot of the dynamics and depth of a sound. Next, heading over to the the track for the inspector window, and that is basically all the features that are enabled within this channel or track. So it has an icon which is editable as long as you click on it. It then tells you what the channel is. So it says channel is instrument 2. It is the second instrument in the list. Freeze mode is something we'll be looking at further in depth. Transpose, again, you're able to transpose not just the region but the entire sound. We then have velocity, which basically means a similar thing. You can adjust the entirety of the loudness. If it's too quiet, you can just kind of boost it just on the entire track, or subsequently make it quieter. We then have a key limit, which basically saying, hey, the bottom key, don't go any lower than this, is C-2. Very rarely will you be going under C1. So C-2 is a big drop down. It's 3 octaves lower. Don't need to worry about that though. We then have the top of the scale, which is G8, which is like the furthest highest note up that you're able to play. We then have a velocity limit, which basically starts at 1 and ends at 127. This is to do with kind of binary encoding and how these programs are designed. The loudest being 127, quietest being 1, and 0 being nothing whatsoever. You actually can't change to 0, which is cool. So it's extremely quiet to the extremely loudest, the furthest loudest point that it can get. We then have a delay, which is in milliseconds, and that is like a delay the entire track by, let's say, 20 milliseconds, or reduce it to be playing quicker by having a minus. We then have a no transpose, which basically means like don't be able to adjust the sound, and then the reset. Personally, I don't use a no transpose or no reset. These are, again, very niche features that you'll see very rarely used. Staff style, again, leave that to auto, and articulation selection, make sure that's selected to none. Otherwise, that can mess up your sound, and it will seem very weird and very all over the place, if I'm honest. Heading further down, we then have the track in like a more a more analog style or more kind of true to life and how it would be. So you have the sound name at the top. Very rarely we see that on an actual desk or board, but let's keep heading further down. We then have some thumbnails, which if you highlight over them, it says gain reduction meter. So if you double click on it, it will load in a specific tool. We then have an EQ thumbnail or equalizer thumbnail. Again, it's another tool. If you click on it, it will load in that tool. We then have MIDI effects. MIDI effects will probably be a whole entire video in itself, as it gives you huge control over how your incoming notes being played can be adjusted to different loudnesses or to trigger multiple notes, not just one. It can also generate kind of riffs and melodic tones via holding one specific note. It basically allows all sorts of different options to be able to achieve just by pressing one note or multiple notes, rather than having to play all of it out manually. You can get the system to automate it for you and do it automatically. We then have the instrument that is currently being used. So in this instance, it is a sampler. So what does that mean? A sampler is a tool which has preloaded sounds, which every time you press a note, it will just play the sound. It won't generate a sound, it will just play a sound. Going further down, we have some audio effects. This preset comes preloaded with 3 tools. First one being a clip distortion, which is like a tool to adjust the qualities and harshness of a sound. Again, we'll be looking at a lot of these audio effects more in depth in another video down the line. We then have a pedal board, which is kind of more true to life in terms of how you would process a sound, with like pedals, like wah pedals, reverb pedals, delay pedals, fuzz pedals, all this good stuff, which again we'll be looking at in another video. And we also have a tape delay. The tape delay is a emulation of like a real life 90s tape, and then being able to achieve a latency created through multiple different things to give a sound a bounce back or an echo or whatever you want to refer to it as. We then have a bus, which is basically like an output, which is like another way of sending out a signal to something else. We then have this lovely button here, which says stereo out. So this stereo out allows you to remap where the sound is being sent. Now, I always recommend it to be stereo output rather than surround or bus, purely because being able to just see the sound being sent directly out makes it extremely easy for you to understand where that sound is going and how it's traveling and where it's traveling to. There will be, of course, a time and a place where you won't be using stereo out and you'll be using buses and groups and all that good stuff, which we'll be looking at probably towards the end of the series. We'll be able to start grouping instruments and all sorts of good stuff together. You then have a group button, again, very rarely used unless you have multiple singers and they're recording together and stuff like that. We then have an automation read, touch, latch, write, all the good stuff to be able to get the system to adjust automatically, automated via the system, which you have full control over. We then have a pan pot. So furthest to the left at -64 means that the sound will be completely panned to your left side, and furthest to the right at +63, meaning the sound is fully coming from the right hand side, only from your right speaker. If you double click on this and hit 0 on your keyboard and hit enter, your sound will be coming out from both speakers perfectly in the middle. We then have this lovely volume fader. So on the left hand side, you have a volume fader, which is basically kind of adjusting the loudness of the sound. And normally these are all set to 0. Personally, I like to have them set to -6. An older thing that's like been built into my head of like not being at 0 because you may get too loud and just causes projects to like have issues down the line. So I'm gonna leave mine at -6. On the right hand side, we then have a meter, like a level meter, as you can see there, as it's highlighted itself. It basically tells you how loud you are, with 0 being the threshold of, hey, you're really loud and you're going to start making issues, to -60 of being really quiet. If the sound is inaudible below 60, it will just give you a readout of like -70 or something. It will get to a point where it won't just say anything, simply because it isn't loud enough for the system to hear. Going further down, we have a mute button, which basically means that the entire sound is muted, not just the region, but everything that's within it. We then have an S, which is for solo, so you can only listen to this one specific track. On the right hand side of that track, we then have the master stereo out, and this is basically like the last channel before it gets sent out to your headphones or to your speakers. You want to make sure this is set to 0 and don't have anything on here, quite frankly, unless you are more knowledgeable in terms of what you can do on the master fader, like adjusting EQs and equalizers and messing with settings and stuff to achieve certain sounds. This will be something that you start to get more comfortable with time as you start working with these channel tracks and being used to them. In our next episode, we'll be looking at the arrange window, setting up the arrange window, and looking at all the functions. I'll catch you guys in the next episode.